Hello. I'm going to try something a little different today and mark the passing of one of our ancestors, one of our relatives, a man very close to Liz, obviously, and I too shared quite close a relationship with him. His birthday is today. He would have been 98 years old if he'd lived, but he didn't. He passed away 7 years ago. But we still take the time to mark his special days. But today I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to try to build a video attempt to tell you a little bit about how, in a way that perhaps is a little different than the written word. Hal was born in Queensland, in Southport, but the place he thought most of was a little place called Caboolture. Well, it was little when he saw it, but it has grown. It is now a sizable suburb on the northern side of Brisbane, on the way to the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast. And it's got a unique little history. Hal was very interested in the history. His father had been heavily involved in this part of the world, and there's a historical village there that he took a lot of pride in looking at. There was things in that village that his family had donated or had eventually found their way to the museum. It's a pretty town. It's just in the hinterland of the Sunshine Coast, as I said, on the way up to Glasssails Mountain. Very pretty area. Another big part of Hal's life was Manly. He built a Manly Junior's yacht with Ralph Tobias. I think it was Ralph Tobias anyway, on the in his lounge room. Now the Manly Manly Junior yacht was really just a small dinghy with a single sail, but it was responsible for letting a lot of people learn to enjoy sailing on this vessel. And Hal built the first and the second one, and then they went on to build even more. It was built around two children, really, teenagers, etc. Could get a lick of speed up, but it was a small play yacht for the harbour. But it would have taught a lot of young people how to sail and been relatively cheap, I would imagine. Oh, no, because it's quite obviously you could build them yourself, plus from plans, or you could buy them. But a lot of children learnt, and Hal was instrumental in keeping the Manly Yacht Club going. He was a member of the RAAF. He joined there in 1940, 41, and became a radar technician. I'll tell you more about that later. But I suppose, as I said, Hal was a complicated creature like most men with a significant number of years under their belt. He lived to 91, so had a lot of experience. But I suppose the highlights for him were, as I said, his growing up, his childhood, his time with Manly Juniors was a real success. He did a lot of good work with the Defence Department, and before that, the Department of Supply, and before that, the Department of Aviation. I think it was Aviation Support, Civil Airlines, I think, Civil Aviation, I think they called it. And he flew around the country or drove around the country putting various bits of equipment together to allow tracking of aircraft or the building radar stations, radio stations, beacons, and that the like. He was proud of his history, his family history, and he could trace it back to his time in the family's line in England, where they came out of Brighton. His father, Harry, had been what they call a dreadnought boy, a 16-year-old boy sent to Australia. But Harry also joined the first AIF and landed at Gallipoli, went through most of World War One, came home with one of the furloughs at the end of World War One, just before the end of the World War. He came home on leave. They didn't realise the war was going to end. He never went back, so he came home in about May of 18. But but he'd been on active service since the end of 1914. Howell went to Southport School and then spent some time in Southport, as I said, then went on to Caboolture. In Caboolture, he helped his dad run bowling alleys, ice rinks, and all sorts of things. The farm. Howell joined the Air Force, as I said, in 1941 and rose to the rank of flight sergeant and was in the specialist area of radar. Now, radar back then was cutting-edge stuff. And in Australia, they just have to take this cutting-edge stuff on, unlike England, where they could be relatively 20 or 30 miles from a support base. In the case of Australia, it could be thousands of miles, and Howe spent much of his time on places like Hammond Island, Cooktown, and the most closest he came to civilization in the war years was probably Townsville, where he met Jean. She was in the Air Force in Townsville in fighter control. He was the radar tech, and they probably spent some time chatting on the radio, on the phone. Eventually they met, went out, and it sparked, and they became husband and wife in 1945, just a couple of days before, not a couple of days, about 2 months or so before the end of World War II. Once again, they wouldn't have known World War II was about to end because they certainly didn't have the information about the atom bomb. From June 1945, it would have looked like it was another 2 years of flogging to finish the Japanese. So they were wartime bride and groom. Jean left the Air Force after she married, and Howard posted to New South Wales for a short while. I suppose that they were re-engaging and getting re-equipped for going further north, but that never happened. He then paid off in December of 45 after the war was over, and he went off to, as I said, fly around Australia with Department of Civil Aviation, putting in training aids, flying aids, and navigation aids, flying around in old DC-3s and other assaulted wartime aircraft into dirt strips, something along those lines. It would have been quite interesting and quite uncomfortable from time to time. The children started to be born from about 1948 onwards, with Dorothy and then David, then Margaret, and finally Elizabeth in 1953. The family then bought a home in Lane Cove in 1953, and that became the family home until Hal and Jean were too old to stay there, and they moved into a nursing home approximately a year before they died. And the house was sold sometime after that to fund their retirement or their nursing stay until such times as they both passed away. Now, 33 Osmond Road was a place that everybody knew was Hal and Jean's place. Hal bought it, paid for it. It was probably only a few £1,000s when he bought it, but that was still quite an investment. family home. Four kids grew up there in a two and a half bedroom place. Those days we were less private than we are today, but it was a lovely home, and you could always feel welcome there. Hal continued to work to raise his family and took 3 girls down the aisle, paid for each wedding himself, and still managed to trip overseas in 1980s to a 3 or 4 month trip to London, France, where they could go and see, or Jean could see where her father fell in World War One. Hal could see some of the places his father had fought in World War One, and they saw the ancestral homes, part of the Barnes World Eagle House in I think it's Tottenham, Brighton, and the places around England that meant something to the family. As the family grew up, it grew bigger. Each one of the girls tended to bring their husband or boyfriend then husband to the family home. And I think nearly everyone kept on the lounge room in there. And as the grandchildren were born, they were once again and brought into the family and quite close. Hal and Jean were always the most non-argumentative couple. They often had fierce rows, but they had fierce love for each other, and they really were quite close and hated to be apart. They both lived a very full life and contributed a lot to the world. But this is about Hal today, and I think he did some amazing stuff. I remember him pulling apart TVs, and he started to lose track of the electronics as they became more and more digitised. But when it was analog stuff, valves and all that, he was quite at home and quite willing to try new things. Even after he retired, he built a database himself and ran his entire library through the database. Helped Liz build the first database for the Naval Historical Society. He was quite an inquiring mind, quite a very smart man to listen to, and he's missed, really missed. So enjoyed the dinners and the long talks we used to have over dinner and sometimes over coffee. He was quite a man and gave a lot of himself, and in many ways I'd say consider him my other father. And considering the respect I have for Dennis, that's saying something. Hal was a particularly intelligent man, and I think in his very own way quite a brave man. I don't recall him being particularly frightened of his impending doom, although it was quite obvious it was coming. Hal was quite a guy. Anyway, happy birthday, Hal. I wish you were able to hear me. Cheers. That's the measure of a man.